Doug Casey used to say the US dollar is the worst currency in the world with the sole exception of all the others. I remember myself selling to the Chinese around 2010, 2011, 2012, and to other Asian nations. But having fairly frank conversations about the US dollar, asking them whether they trust us, as example, did. No, but we trust you way more than we trust each other, meaning other emerging economies. I remember describing to the manager of an Asian sovereign wealth fund the fact that while I was flattered that they were investing in U.S. Treasury securities, thinking relative to the credit quality, whether they thought the U.S. government was honest. And they said, well, ultimately, of course, it's a lie. This is a quote. But yours is a deep and liquid lie, unlike the other lies that we're told. Think about what backs a BRIC currency. Who owes you seigniorage or sovereignty? Think about the fact that all the currencies which would be constituent, or all of the domestic political and monetary systems which would be which would be constituents, they're mostly themselves opaque and non-convertible. Right. Think about the fact that until 25 or 30 years ago, the Russians and the Chinese were engaged in a shooting war across the Amur River. What the BRICS system will ultimately be, if it becomes anything, is a trade settlements mechanism. If the BRICS countries really believed that there was going to be a currency, they wouldn't be buying gold because they wouldn't need a medium of exchange. They could conjure one up. Imagine yourself as Xi, and imagine a circumstance where you thought over the course of a year you would have a $150 billion trade surplus with the Russians. What do you want from Russia? A little bit of fertilizer, some natural gas, maybe some vodka? How much vodka are the Chinese going to drink?
In 2023, the US dollar accounted for over 60% of global foreign exchange reserves, yet its dominance faces increasing scrutiny. Financial expert Rick Rule delves into this complex reality, revealing that despite its flaws, the US dollar remains the primary medium of exchange due to deep-rooted trust issues among emerging economies. He recounts candid conversations with Asian sovereign wealth managers who, despite recognizing the US government's inconsistencies, still prefer the dollar over other currencies. Rule highlights a striking quote, describing the dollar as a deep and liquid lie, emphasizing its relative transparency compared to other opaque and non-convertible currencies. Furthermore, Rule explains the strategic moves of BRICS countries, noting that their significant gold purchases signal skepticism about creating a unified currency. He also touches on the implications of US sanctions, which enforce compliance even among non-American entities through systems like Swiss banking. Rick Rule also addresses a looming generational debt crisis, pointing out that the current generation faces a $100 trillion burden due to previous policies. He urges individuals to become anti-fragile, preparing themselves to withstand and thrive amidst economic volatility.
So now imagine that you end up with a bunch of IOUs from the Russians. How do you turn it into something that you want? Do you counterclaim against the South Africans? How about the Brazilians? Maybe Bolivia pays you off. You get where I'm going?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Good point.
The primary medium of exchange, I think, for the balance of my lifetime, will be the US dollar. I think that there will be some disintermediation out of the US dollar in terms of bilateral settlements, but that those bilateral settlements will have really 90-day settlements. And I bet you that the de facto settlement mechanism will be US dollars. Pick a country in the world and complain about bullying at the hands of the US, and you are popular.
Right. I see. Okay, yeah. So this is probably why we're going to war now, right?
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, we're forcing them. Whether or not you agree with what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, the fact is that we stole $300 billion worth of U.S. Treasury securities owned by the Russians. Suppose that you're another country and you think that your policies may get you in difficulty with the US dollar. You think there was a lesson there? Think about the fact that the US dollar enforced sanctions between two third parties, no Americans, through the SWIFT banking system. In other words, we constrain the Belgians in terms of doing business with Iran or North Korea or somebody else that they might want to do business with. The enemy of the US dollar is not in Brussels or in Moscow or in Shanghai. The enemy of the US dollar is in Washington.
Right.
We're responsible for the origination of the BRIC system. As that great political philosopher Pogo once said, I have met the enemy and he is us. I don't know if you're old enough to remember those Pogo cartoons. I have invested in a few technologies around the digitization of financial markets and commodities. Back at Sprott, we did the same thing. Sprott maintains those investments. Mm-hmm. We're watching very carefully the work that the World Gold Council is doing with industry, including Agnico Eagle.
Okay.
A very good former partner of mine, Peter Grosskopf, is on the board of directors of the World Gold Council and also on the board of directors of Agnico Eagle. He's sort of my de facto consultant as to where this is going technologically. I must admit, at age 71, I prefer to rely on a 54-year-old. There's some conjunction in part of my argument and yours, which is to say that increasing control by intergovernmental elites is always something they want. To the extent that they could leave less control over our purchasing and savings decisions to ourselves and accrue more of it to themselves, that would certainly be in their instinct, in their interest. I actually don't think they're smart enough to do it in a conspiratorial sense. I know that the hard money movement has been a hotbed of conspiracy theory for my whole time in it. There's been a discussion that there's been a decades-long conspiracy, as an example, to depress the price of silver. Mm-hmm. They didn't need to do that. The price was going to go down all by itself. You know, you did. I mean, yes, is it manipulated overnight, as an example, at trading desks? Of course, all currencies are. But these great big conspiracies, in my experience, have required too much intelligence and too much planning and too much discipline to occur. My friend Doug Casey, again, describes a lot of these government people as people of medium capabilities from good families who, were it not for jobs in government, would wear a mask and a gun to a 7-Eleven. In other words, not necessarily the kind of people who could maintain a thoroughgoing conspiracy. To the extent that circumstances, A, allowed it, and B, warranted, that would be a different circumstance. I also don't think that the government needs to work very hard to foster increasing reliance on government by individuals, because that's what individuals want. I don't happen to think it's a good thing for them, but I think people vote because they want to impose their wills and their value on other people. They don't want to be reliant on themselves for their success or failure. They certainly don't want to be blamed for their success or failure. They want to be able to blame other people. And so in that sense, I don't think the government needs to work too hard to foster reliance on the government, because I think it's that very reliance on the government that assigns our actual enemy seigniorage, unfortunately. I think that's the greatest problem in the world. Really, truly the greatest problem in the world is that people don't understand the concept of voluntary exchange and the concept that one acquires material wealth by generating more utility than one consumes. It isn't about assignment, it's about creation. Look at people your age, okay? Without any view of conspiracy, you need to deal with the fact that my generation voted itself $100 trillion worth of benefits and forgot to pay for it. Okay? I mean, that's over, right? So you need to decide amongst yourself whether you do what might be considered to be the right thing, which is to say, you guys voted yourselves these benefits, you pay for them, we're not gonna. tough thing to do politically, or you understand that you're going to pay in and not get any benefits from it at all. Really, really, really interesting challenge. And as the friction from that challenge increases, what you really need to decide is how you're going to protect yourself. That's what you need to decide. Whether what you say in terms of a reset takes place in dramatic fashion, or whether simply the friction generated by competing voting blocks, young and old, white and black, rich and poor, whatever it is, BRICS,
Right.
generates so much risk that the volatility that's a consequence of that friction destabilizes your life. The answers, the probabilistic answers, there's no absolute answer. The probabilistic answer in either of those scenarios is roughly similar. You need to become individually anti-fragile, irrespective of how you think it plays. I'm not discounting what you say. I'm suggesting to you that if the investing vanguard and the voting vanguard around the world thinks that your response is alarmist, if they're incrementalists rather than alarmists, the strategy is the same.
Yeah.
It's unchanged.